Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud, while stoned. Today, we're going to do part 4 of the Little Blue Book number 61, titled, What is Religion? Written by Leo Tolstoy. And let's see. Yep, we left off at the beginning of chapter 12. So, here we go. Hydrate, kids. No one likes cottonmouth. Chapter 12. Christ reproached the scribes and Pharisees because they took the keys of the kingdom of heaven, but neither themselves entered in nor let others enter. The learned scribes of today do the same. They have now taken the keys not of the kingdom of heaven, but of enlightenment, and neither enter in nor let others enter. The hierophants, the priests, by all sorts of deception and hypnotism, have instilled into people an idea that Christianity is not a teaching proclaiming the equality of all men, and therefore destructive of the whole present system of life, but that, on the contrary, it supports the existing order of things and bids us differentiate people, like the stars, and regard them as belonging in different orders, acknowledging any existing authority as ordained of God, and obeying it absolutely. In fact, suggesting to the oppressed that their position is what God wishes it to be, and that they ought to put up with it meekly and humbly, submitting to their oppressors, who need not be meek or humble, but should, as emperors, kings, popes, bishops, and secular or spiritual spiritual magnates of various kinds, correct others by teaching and punishing them, while themselves living in splendor and luxury, which it is the duty of those in subjection to supply. And the ruling classes, thanks to this false teaching, which they strongly support, roll over the people, obliging them to furnish means of support for their rulers, idleness, luxury, and vices. And the only men who have freed themselves from this hypnotism, the scientific people, those, therefore, who alone are able to free the people from their oppression, do not do it, though they say they wish to, but instead of doing what might attain that end, they do just the opposite, imagining that they thereby serve the people. One would think these men, even from casually observing what it is that those who hold the masses in subjection are most afraid of, might see what really moves men, and what really keeps them down in the places they now occupy, and would direct their whole force to that source of power. They not only do not do this, however, but they consider such action quite useless. It is as if these men do not wish to see the facts. They assiduously and sincerely do all sorts of different things for the people, but they do not do the one thing primarily needful. And their activity is like the activity of a man trying to move a train by exerting his muscles, when he need only get upon the engine and do what he constantly sees the engine driver do: move a lever to let steam into the cylinders. That steam is men's religious conception of life, and they need only notice the eagerness with which those in authority retain control of that motive power, by means of which the rulers lord it over the masses, and the advanced men will understand to what they must direct their efforts in order to free the people from its slavery. What does the Sultan of Turkey guard, and to what does he cling for support? And why does the Russian emperor, on arriving at a town, go first thing to kiss an icon or the relic of some saint? And why, in spite of all the varnish of culture he so prides himself on, does the German emperor, in all his speeches, seasonably or unseasonably, speak of God, of Christ, of the sanctity of religion, of oaths, etc.? simply because they all know that their power rests on the army, and that the army, the very possibility of a thing as an army existing, rests on religion. And if wealthy people are generally particularly devout, making a show of believing, going to church, and observing the Sabbath, it is all done chiefly because an instinct of self-preservation warns them that their exceptionally advantageous position in the community is bound up with the religion they profess. These people often do not know in what way their privileges rest on religious deception, but their instinct of self-preservation warns them of the weak spot in that on which their power rests, and they first of all defend that place. Within certain limits, these people always allow, and have allowed, socialistic and even revolutionary propaganda, but the foundations of religion they never allow to be touched. And therefore, if history and psychology do not suffice to enable the advanced men of today, the learned, the liberals, the socialists, the revolutionists, and anarchists, to discover what it is that moves the people, this visible indication should suffice to convince them that the motive power lies not in material conditions, but only in religion. Yet, strange to say, the learned, advanced people of today, who understand and discuss the conditions of life of various nations very accurately, and not see what is so obvious that it strikes one's eye, if these men intentionally leave the people in their religious ignorance for the sake of retaining their own profitable position among the minority, this is a revolting fraud. Men who act so are the very hypocrites Christ especially denounced. The only people he did in fact denounce, and he denounced them because no monsters or malefactors ever brought so much evil into human life as it brought by these men. But if they are sincere, the only explanation of so strange an eclipse of reason is that just as the masses are hypnotized by a false religion, so also are the pseudo-enlightened men of today hypnotized by a false science, which has decided that the chief motor nerve that now, as heretofore, actuates humanity, has become altogether useless and can be replaced by something else. And that is the end of chapter 12. Hydrate. Medicate at your leisure. Chapter 13. This delusion or deceit of the scribes, the educated men of our world, is a peculiarity of our times, and in this lies the cause of the miserable condition in which Christian humanity now lives, as well as the brutalization into which it is sinking deeper and deeper. It is usual for the advanced educated classes of our world to assert that the false religious beliefs held by the masses are of no special importance, and that it is not worthwhile and is unnecessary to struggle against them directly, as was done by Hume, Voltaire, Rousseau, and others. Science, they think, that is to say, the disconnected casual information they disseminate among the people, will of itself attain that end, and man, having learned how many million miles it is from the earth to the sun, and what metals exist in the sun and the stars, will cease to believe in church doctrines. This sincere or insincere assertion or assumption covers either a great delusion or a terrible deception. From the very earliest years of childhood, the years most susceptible to suggestion, when those who train children cannot be sufficiently careful what they transmit to them, a child is hypnotized with the absurd and immoral dogmas of so-called Christian religion. Irreconcilable with our reason and knowledge, he is taught the dogma of the Trinity, which healthy reason cannot hold. The coming of one the coming of one of the three gods to earth for the salvation of the human race, and his resurrection and ascent into heaven, is taught to expect a second coming and punishment and eternal torment for disbelief in those dogmas. Also, he is taught to pray for what he wants, and many other things. And when all things, incompatible as it is with reason, contemporary knowledge, and man's conscience, is indelibly stamped on the child's impressionable mind, he is left to himself to find his way as he can amid the contradictions which flow from these dogmas he has accepted and assimilated as unquestionable truths. No one tells him how he may or should reconcile these contradictions, or if the theologians do try to reconcile them, their attempts only confuse the matter more than before. So little by little, the man becomes accustomed to suppose, and the theologians strongly support this notion, that reason cannot be trusted, and therefore anything is possible, and that there is no capacity in man by means of which he can himself distinguish good from evil, or falsehood from truth, and that in what is most important for him, his actions, he should be guided not by his reason, but by what others tell him. It is evident what a terrible perversion of man's spiritual world such an education must produce, reinforced as it is in adult life by all the means of hypnotization, which by the aid of the priest is continually exercised upon the people. If a man of strong spirit, with great labor and suffering, does succeed in freeing himself from the hypnotism in which he has been educated in childhood and held in mature life, the perversion of his mind, produced by the persuasion that he must distrust his own reason, can still not pass without leaving traces, just as in the physical world the poisoning of an organism with some powerful virus cannot pass without leaving its trace. It is natural for such a man, having freed himself from the hypnotism of this deceit, and hating the falsehood from which he has just escaped, to adopt the view advocated by advanced men, and to regard every religion as an obstacle in the path along which humanity is progressing. And having adopted that opinion, such a man becomes, like his teachers, devoid of principle, that is, devoid of conscience, and guided in life merely by his desires. Nor does he condemn himself for this, but he considers that it places him on the highest plane of mental development attainable by man. That is what may happen when men of strong minds, the less strong, though they may be roused to doubts, will never completely free themselves from the deception in which they were brought up, but adopting or inventing various cunningly devised cloudy theories to justify the absurd dogmas they have accepted, and living in a sphere of doubts, mist, sophistries, and self-deception, they will cooperate in the mystification of the masses and oppose their enlightenment. But the majority of men, having neither the strength nor the opportunity to struggle against the hypnotism exercised over them, will live and die generation after generation, as they do now, deprived of man's highest welfare, which is a truly religious understanding of life, and will remain docile tools of the classes that rule over them and deceive them. And it is this terrible deception that advanced the learning men consider unimportant and not worth directly attacking. The only explanation of such an assertion, if those who make it are sincere, is that they are themselves under the hypnotism of a false science. But if they are not science, then their conduct is explained by the fact that an attack on established beliefs is unprofitable and often dangerous. In any case, one way or another, the assertion that the profession of a false religion does not harm, or though harmful, is unimportant, and that one can therefore disseminate enlightenment without destroying religious deception, is quite untrue. Mankind can be saved from its ills only by being freed, both from the hypnotism in which the priests are holding it, and from that into which the learned are leading it. To pour anything into a full bottle, one must first empty out what it contains. And similarly, it is necessary for to free men from the deception of their false faith, in order that they may be able to adopt a true religion, that is, a correct relation, in accord with the development humanity has attained, towards the source of all, towards God, and that from this relation they may obtain guidance for their actions. And that is the end of chapter 13. Hydrate. Chapter 14. Pardon me. But is there any true religion? Religions are endlessly various, and we have no right to call one of them true, just because it most nearly suits our own taste. Is what people say who look at the external forms of religion as to some disease from which they feel themselves free, but from which other people still suffer. But this is a mistake. Religions differ in their external forms, but they are all alike in their fundamental principles. And it is these principles that are fundamental to all religions, that form the true religion, which alone at the present time is suitable for us all, and the adoption of which alone can save men from their ills. Mankind has lived long, and just as it has produced and improved its practical inventions through successive generations, so also it could not fail to produce and improve those spiritual principles which have formed the basis of its life, as well as the rules and conduct resulted from those principles. If blind men do not see these, that does not prove that they do not exist. This religion of our times, common to all men, exists, not as some sect with all its peculiarities and perversions, but as a religion consisting of those principles which are alike in all the widespread religions known to us, and professed by more than 9/10 of the human race. And that men are not yet completely brutalized is due to the fact that the best men of all nations hold to their religion and profess it, even if unconsciously, and only the hypnotic deception practiced on men by the aid of the priests and scientists now hinders men from consciously adopting it. The principles of this true religion are so natural to men that as soon as they are put before them, they are accepted as something something quite familiar and self-evident. For us, the true religion is Christianity, and those of its principles in which it agrees not with the external forms, but with the basic principles of Brahmanism, Confucianism, Taoism, Hebrewism, Buddhism, and even Mohammedanism. And just in the same way, for those who profess Brahmanism, Confucianism, etc., true religion is that of which the basic principles agree with those of all other religions. And these principles are very simple, intelligible, and clear. These principles are that there is a God, the origin of all things, that in man dwells a spark from that divine origin, which man, by his way of living, can increase or decrease in himself, that to increase this divine spark, man must suppress his passions and increase love in himself, and that the practical means to obtain this result is to do to others as you would they should do to you. All these principles are common to Brahmanism, Hebrewism, Confucianism, and Mohammedanism. If Buddhism supplies no definition of God, it nevertheless acknowledges that with which men comingless, and into which he is not absorbed when he attains to nirvana, so that with which man comingless, boy, this is a strange sentence, comingless, or, I just don't understand that word, or into which he is absorbed in nirvana, is the same origin that is called God in Hebrewism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism. But that is not religion, is what men of today will say, who are accustomed to consider that the supernatural, i.e. the unmeaning, is the chief sign of religion. That is anything you like, philosophy, ethics, redignation, but not religion. Religion, according to them, must be absorbed and unintelligible. Yet, it was only from these very principles, or rather in consequence of their being preached as religious doctrines, that, by a long process of perversion, all those absurd miracles and supernatural occurrences were elaborated, which are now considered to be the fundamental signs of every religion. To assert that supernatural and irrational form the essential characteristics of religion is like observing only rotten apples, and then asserting that a flabby bitterness and a harmful effect on the stomach are the prime characteristics of the fruit called apple. Religion is the definition of man's relation to the source of all things, and of man's purpose in life, which results from that relation, and it supplies rules of conduct resulting from that purpose. And the universal religion, whose first principles are alike in all the faiths, fully meets the demands of this understanding of religion. It defines the relation of man to God as being that of a part to the whole. From this relation, it deduces man's purpose, which is to increase the divine element in himself. And this purpose involves practical demands on man, in accord with the rule, to others as you wish them to do to others as you wish them to do to you. People often doubt, and I myself at one time doubted, whether such an abstract rule as do to others as you wish them to do to you can be as obligatory a rule and guide for action as the simpler rules to fast, pray, and take communion, etc. But an irrefutable reply to that doubt is supplied, for instance, by the spiritual condition of a Russian peasant who would rather die than spit out the sacrament unto a manure heap, but who yet, at the command of men, is ready to kill his brother. Why should demands flowing from the rule of doing to others as you wish them to do unto you, such, for instance, as not killing one's brother man, not reviling, not committing adultery, not revenging oneself, not taking advantage of the need of one's brethren to satisfy one's own caprice, and many others. Why should not they be instilled as forcibly and become as binding and invocable as the belief in the sanctity of the sacraments, or of images, etc.? Now is to men whose faith is founded on credulity, than on any clear inward consciousness. End of chapter 14. Boy, there were some sentences in there that was tough. And the wording was different. Chapter 15. The truths of the religion common to all men of our time are so simple, so intelligible, and so near the heart of each man, that it would seem only necessary for parents, rulers, and teachers to instill into children and adults, instead of the opposite and absurd doctrines in which they themselves often do not believe, about trinities, virgin mothers, redemptions, Indras, Trimetri, and about Buddhas, and Mohammeds who fly away into the sky. Those clear and simple truths, the metaphysical essence of which is that the Spirit of God dwells in man, and the practical rule of which is that man should do to others as he wishes them to do to him. For the whole life of humanity to change, if only, in the same way that the belief is now instilled into children and confirmed in adults, that God sent his Son to redeem Adam's sin, and that he established his church which must be obeyed, as well as rules deduced from these beliefs, telling when and where to pray, and make offerings, when to refrain from such and such food, and on what days to abstain from work. If only it were instilled and confirmed that God is a spirit, whose manifestation is present in us, the strength of which we can increase by our lives. If only this, and all that naturally flows from this, were instilled in the same way that quite useless stories of impossible occurrences and rules of meaningless ceremonies deduced from those stories are now instilled, then, instead of purposeless strife and discord, we should very soon, without the aid of diplomatists, international law, peace congress, political economists, and socialists, and all their various subdivisions, see humanity living a peaceful, united, and happy life, guided by the one religion. But nothing of the kind is done. Not only is the deception of false religion not destroyed, and the true one not preached, but on the contrary, men depart further and further away from the possibility of accepting the truth. The chief cause of people not doing what is so natural, easy, and possible is that men today, in consequence of having lived long without religion, are so accustomed to establish and defend their existence by violence, by bayonets, bullets, prisons, and gallows, that it seems to them as if such an arrangement of life were not only normal, but were the only one possible. Not only do those who profit by the existing order think so, but those even who suffer from it are stupefied by the hypnotism exercised upon them, that they also consider violence to be the only means of securing good order in human society. Yet it is just this arrangement and maintenance of the commonwealth by violence that does most to hinder people from comprehending the cause of their sufferings, and consequently from being able to establish a true order. The results of it are such as might be produced by a bad or malicious doctor, who should drive malignant eruption inwards, thereby cheating the sick man and making the disease worse and its cure impossible. To people or the ruling classes who enslave the masses and think and say, it seems very convenient by means of the army, the priesthood, the soldiers, and the police, as well as by threats of bayonets, bullets, prisons, workhouses, and gallows, to compel the enslaved people to remain in stupefaction and enslavement, and not to hinder the rulers from exploiting them. And the ruling men do this, calling it the maintenance of good order. But there is nothing that so hinders the establishment of a good social order as this does. In reality, far from being the establishment of good order, it is the establishment of evil. If men of our Christian nations, still possessing some remnants of those religious principles, which in spite of everything, yet live in the people, had not before them the continual example of crime committed by those who have assumed the duty of guarding order and morality among men, the wars, executions, prisons, taxation, sale of intoxicants and of opium, they would never have thought of committing 1/100th of the evil deeds, the frauds, violence, and murders, which they now commit in full confidence that such deeds are good and natural for men to commit. The law of human life is such that the only way to improve it, whether for the individual or for a society of men, is by means of inward moral growth towards perfection. All attempts of men to better their lives by external action by violence, serve as the most effectuous propaganda and example of evil, and therefore not only do not improve life, but on the contrary, increase the evil which, like a snowball, grows larger and larger, and removes men more and more from the only possible way of truly bettering their lives. In proportion as the practice of violence and crime, committed in the name of the law by the guardians of order and morality, becomes more and more frequent and cruel, and is more and more justified by the hypnotism of the falsehood presented as religion, men will be more and more confirmed in the belief that the law of their life is not one of love and service to their fellows, but is one demanding that they should strive with and devour one another. And the more that they are confirmed in that thought, which degrades them to the plane of the beasts, the harder will it be to shake off the hypnotic trance in which they are living, and to accept as the basis of their life the true religion of our time, common to all humanity. A vicious circle has been established. The absence of religion makes possible an animal life based on violence. An animal life based on violence makes emancipation from hypnotism and an adoption of true religion more and more impossible. And, therefore, men do not do what is natural, possible, and necessary in our times. Do not destroy the deception and simulacrum of religion, and do not assimilate and preach the true religion. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. In any issue from this enchanted circle possible, and if so, what is it? Oh, I'm sorry, let me read that again. Is any issue from this enchanted circle possible? And if so, what is it? At first it seems as if the governments, which have taken on themselves the duty of guiding the life of the people for their benefit, should lead us out of this circle. This is what men who have tried to alter the arrangements of life founded on violence and to replace them by a reasonable agreement based on mutual service and love have always supposed, so that the Christian reformers and the founders of various theories of European communism, and so also thought the celebrated Chinese reformer Mao Tai, who for the welfare of the people proposed to the government not to teach school children military sciences and exercises, and not to give rewards to children for military achievements, but to teach children and adults the roles of esteem and love, and give rewards and encouragement for feats of love. So also thought and think many religious peasant reformers, of whom I have known, and now know several, beginning with Sortiev and ending with an old man who has now 5 times presented a petition to the emperor, asking him to decree the abrogation of false religion and to order that true Christianity be preached. It seems to men natural that the government, which justifies its existence on the score of its care for the welfare of the people, must, to secure that welfare, wish to use the only means which can never do people any harm, and can only produce the most fruitful results. Government, however, has not only never taken upon itself this duty, but on the contrary, has always and everywhere maintained with the greatest jealousy and any false effete religion prevalent at the period, and has in every way persecuted those who have tried to inform the people of the principles of true religion. In reality, this cannot be otherwise. For governments to expose the falsity of the present religions and to preach the true one would be as if a man were to cut down the branch on which he was sitting. But if government will not do this work, it would seem certain that those learned men, who, having freed themselves from the deception of false religion, say they wish to serve the common people whose labor has provided for their education and support, are bound to do it. But these men, like the government, do not do it. First, because they consider it inexpedient to risk unpleasantness and to suffer the danger of persecution at the hands of the ruling classes for exposing a fraud which government protects and which, in their opinion, will disappear of itself. Secondly, because considering all religions to be an effete error, they have nothing to offer the people in place of the deception they are expected to destroy. There remain those great masses of unlearned men who are under the hypnotic influence of church and government deception, and who therefore believe that the simulacrum of religion, which has been instilled into them, is the one true religion, and that there is and can be no other. These masses are under a constant and intense hypnotic influence. Generation after generation, they are born and live and die in the stupefied condition in which they are kept by the clergy and the government. And if they free themselves from that influence, they are sure to fall into the school of the scientists who deny religion, when their influence becomes as useless and harmful as the influence of their teachers, so that for some men the work is unprofitable, while for others it is impossible. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. It looks as if no issue were possible, and indeed for irreligious men there is not and cannot be any issue from this position. Those who belong to the higher governing classes, even if they pretend to be concerned for the welfare of the masses, will never seriously attempt, guided by worldly aims, they cannot do it, to destroy the stupefaction and servitude in which these masses live, and which makes it possible for the upper classes to rule over them. In the same way, men belonging to the enslaved masses cannot, while guided by worldly motives, wish to make their own hard position harder by entering on a struggle against the upper classes, to expose a false teaching, and to preach a true one. Turn another page. Neither of these sets of men have any motive to do this, and if they are intelligent, they will never attempt it. But it is otherwise for religious people. Men such as those who, however perverted a society may be, are always to be found guarding with their lives the sacred fires of religion, without which human life could not exist. There are times, and our times as such, when these men are unnoticed, when, as among us in Russia, despised and derided by all, their lives pass unrecorded, in exile, in prisons, and in penal battalions. Yet they live, and on them depends the rational life of humanity. And it is just these religious men, however few they may be, who alone can and will render asunder the enchanted circle which keeps men bound. They can do it, because all the disadvantages and dangers which hinder a worldly man from opposing the existing order of society not only do not impede a religious man, but rather increase his zeal in the struggle against falsehood, and impel him to confess by word and deed what he holds to be divine truth. If he belongs to the ruling classes, he will not only not wish to hide the truth out of regard for his own advantageous position, but, on the contrary, having come to hate such advantages, he will exert his whole strength to free himself from them, and to preach the truth, for he will no longer have any other aim in life than to serve God. If he belongs to the enslaved, then in the same way, unbiased by the wish common among those of his position to improve the condition of his personal life, such a man will have no aim but to fulfill the will of God by exposing falsehood and confessing truth, and no sufferings or threats will make him cease to live in accord with that purpose which he has recognized in his life. They will both act thus, as naturally as a worldly man exerts himself and puts up with privations to obtain riches, or to please a ruler from whom he expects to receive advantages. Every religious man acts thus, because a human soul enlightened by religion no longer lives merely by the life of this world, as irreligious people do, but lives an eternal, infinite life, for which suffering and death in this life are as insignificant as are blisters on his hands or weariness of limbs to the plowman when he is plowing a field. These are the men who will rend asunder the enchanted circle in which people are now confined. However few such men there may be, however humble their social position, however poor in education or ability, as surely as fire lights the dry steep, so surely will these people set the whole world aflame, and kindle all the hearts of men, withered by long lack of a religion, and now thirsting for the renewal of life. Religion is not a belief, settled once for all, in certain supernatural occurrences supposed to have taken place once upon a time, nor is a necessity for such prayers and ceremonies, nor is it, as the scientists suppose, a survival of the superstitions of ancient ignorance, which in our time has no meaning or application to life. But religion is a certain relation of man to eternal life and to God, a relation accordant with reason and contemporary knowledge, and it is the one thing that alone moves humanity forward towards its destined aim. A wise Hebrew proverb says, "The soul of man is the lamp of God." Man is a weak and miserable animal until the light of God burns in his soul. But when that light burns, and it burns only in souls enlightened by religion, man becomes the most powerful being in the world. Nor can this be otherwise, for what then acts in him is no longer his strength, but is the strength of God. So this is what religion is, and in what its essence consists. February 1902. So there you go. This is the end of Little Blue Book number 61, titled "What is Religion?" by Leo Tolstoy. And it was about a buttload of repetition, I think. So there you go. All right, join me in the next book. Thanks for listening.